Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Japan Business Podcast, episode 4. My name is Eric Ahorner, your host and founder of Japan Business Consulting. In the last episode, we talked about Japanese sales channels, and today we're going to talk about cultural considerations in business with Japan. Now, I think I do not have to mention the importance of understanding cultural nuances in Japanese business. If you don't know how to navigate culture and business, it will be very difficult to long-term be successful in Japan. Now, I want to separate or segment the podcast today. Today's podcast will be completely without any presentation or anything. So even if you're listening, you should be fine. But I want to talk about cultural nuances impacting business in the first segment. Then the second segment, I'll talk about building strong relationships. The third segment will be about communication styles and etiquette, which I had already partially mentioned in episode 2 of the podcast. And then we're going to close with what we've learned. So first of all, talking about cultural nuances impacting business. First and foremost, we need to understand that Japan has a high context communication style. What does that mean in comparison to low context and high context? High context means that you need to read between the lines. To give you an example, in Japan, when people ask too many questions or don't really understand what was meant by a certain gesture or face expression, they're quickly called KY, which stands for Kuki Yomenai, or can't read the air, or translated into English, cannot read between the lines. And foreigners usually fall into that category. So if you're a foreigner that doesn't know much about Japanese culture or business culture, you might be maybe not called out loud, but people will think you're a KY because you don't know certain rules, unspoken rules or cultural norms in Japan, and you might make mistakes, but that's part of the journey. And so what you always have to keep in mind is that reading between the lines is something very typical for high context communication style, which is the case in Japan. Why? Because Japan is a very homogeneous culture, or has a very homogeneous culture compared to immigration countries like the US or some countries in Europe. So, we have so many different cultures and so many different opinions and traditions here that there's a low context, or people have to explain what they mean. If you have a very, very homogeneous culture, people don't need to explain so many things. It is obvious to the majority because they take certain things for obvious, and you don't need to talk about them. So since Japan is still a relatively low immigration country, it has a high context communication style. Now, in addition to this importance of reading between the lines, building trust through indirect communication is very important. What does that mean? If you want to make sure that your business partners truly accept you, it is not only about talking, it is also about making nonverbal communication or doing nonverbal communication with your business partner. For example, showing that you know Japanese traditions, norms, gestures, politeness, without saying something, without mentioning it. If you can show by actions, without using words, that you know certain norms, you can build trust in Japan. So making yourself familiar with Japanese business etiquette is very important, and also showing nonverbal proof of your trustworthiness. with your business partner will absolutely help you in building trust, again, through indirect communication. Japan also, in regards to the cultural nuances and that are impacting business, has a group-oriented decision-making style. Now, there is consensus building in groups, which I touched on also again in episode 2 briefly, where a decision might not be made during a meeting. In most cases, it's not made during a meeting when you're meeting with the other party. So for example, you want to strike a deal with a company and they're hesitant, they don't want to make, the decision maker doesn't want to make that decision there and then, and they will get back with that or take that decision and postpone it to an internal meeting, and will set up a new meeting with you to transmit the message. So the meeting itself in Japan is not meant to be a decision-making location, but a delivering a message location. So the decision processes might take a bit longer in Japan, but on the other hand, after the decision is made, the rest happens pretty quickly. Decisions, or sometimes, or making decisions in Japan can be a long process, and many Westerners get very frustrated. But once the decision is made, the action taking and the operations are pretty seamless and quick. Then hierarchy, although decision is made in a consensus with a team, the hierarchy is still very important in organizations. So respecting the hierarchy, who you're talking to, who you're addressing, who you actually try to address for accelerating the decision-making process is very important. It's a delicate point that you need to better understand what the hierarchy is in the organization that you're dealing with, and to not make mistakes, to talk to the wrong people that in the end will not help you and not make the necessary decision that you're looking for. Now, moving on into the second segment where we're talking about building strong relationships, the emphasis in Japan, rather being transactional or having like a transactional business relationship, it is about building truly long-term, strong relationships. Even if the transaction isn't there, a Japanese business partner will value the long-term relationship with you more than a short-term transaction or even a mid-term transaction. So even if you cannot perform short-term, they will most likely not complain, but try to build a long-term relationship, because if they already made the decision to work with you, that's a proof that they have done their due diligence on you and they do trust you, that you will be the right partner long-term. So they're not necessarily looking for short-term gain from a certain business relationship or a deal that was agreed on. But the same applies to you as well. So if they do not make the necessary or the expected progress on certain things, they expect that you react the same way and that you focus on the relationship rather than on the short-term transaction. Now, again, before you even get to that point, you need to establish trust. Before you even do business with them, you really need to establish trust. Before starting a small project, they need to know that you're trustworthy, that you know what their pain points are, you know how to communicate with them, you know what they're afraid of, that they're risk averse, you know who they are currently working with and why they'd rather work with that company than with yours. You need to make a plan B. So for example, rather than switch the supplier immediately, say, how about having us as a secondary supplier and we take it from there. So again, establishing trust for your business is very important. Now, there are networking events where you might be able to get to your decision makers of the target customer that you want to work with. But keep in mind that in Japan, it is rather uncommon to just walk up to somebody and introduce yourself. It does happen, and it's getting more, let's say, accepted. But traditionally in Japan, you get introduced by someone that already knows that person, and that gets you into that circle. So when you go to a networking or relationship building event, keep this in mind, that you rather have someone that introduces you than introduce yourself. I mean, of course, you can do that as well, but there might be some awkward moments if you go that and do that straightforward. It is, again, it's not impossible, and absolutely you can do it. And as you are a foreigner, I suppose, it will be more acceptable. You have that so-called gaijin or foreigner bonus that you can do that. But it's always smoother entry if you're introduced by someone. Then, in building strong relationships, we also have to consider the gift-giving etiquette. Like, there's a significance of gift-giving in Japanese culture. Japanese give gifts at customer visits. There's a gift-giving in the middle of the year, towards the end of the year. You usually don't come empty-handed to a business meeting, especially if you come from abroad. People always, they don't expect it. But if you know a bit about Japanese business culture, coming with some kind of gift will be very well accepted, and they will understand that you have understood Japanese business culture. So don't exaggerate, but in best case, some consumable or some local specialty, some food item, or some drink will be highly appreciated, and you should try to keep it below $50 to not exaggerate it, and in turn cause some awkward moment again if it's something too fancy. Now, there are also different gifts for different occasions. So, for example, you should always consider the season that you're going to visit, or you're going to have a visitor from Japan. Japanese love seasonal gifts. So if you have anything that is seasonal from your area where you're from, that would be truly appreciated, since Japan is a very seasonal gift giving, has a very seasonal gift giving tradition, and it's like the seasons, basically spring, summer, fall, and winter. Now, coming to the last segment, which is communication styles and etiquette. Talking about politeness and formality. In Japan, the proper use of honorifics and titles is very important. So you usually end with a san, so Tanaka-san, whoever-san. Usually it's not the first name, but the family name that you're using. That's showing more respect. But in turn, Japanese tend to use first names of foreigners with a san in the end. So they do have kind of a honorific at the very end, but they will put your first name in there. I give you a small example of my time at Komatsu. Everybody had their name tag with their family name in my purchasing department when I used to work in Komatsu. So Tanaka-san, or I don't know, Mitsukoshi-san, or Yamada-san, you name it, or without a san in the end, but just Yamada, Tanaka, Mitsukoshi, and so on and so on. And I had on my table a name tag with just Eric. So I kind of complained. I was like a kind of a KY or Kuki no Yomanai, can't read between the lines, but I found it a bit, honestly, since I come from Germany, where formality is a bit more important than in the US, for example, and where usually you address somebody by their family name when you get to know them for quite a long time, until they offer you to call them by their first name. Until then, you just call them by their family name. So in most occasions where somebody's older than you. So I actually requested to have my name tag changed to my family name as well. Although my family name sounds a bit strange or funny in Japanese. It's Ahorna, which kind of means stupid or silly. But it's easy to remember. So Aho means silly or stupid. And so I kind of insisted that they gave me my name tag with my family name, but that I made a point there, and they also realized, oh, okay, not all foreigners are the same, because he's from Germany. He has, some different culture, like his cultural backgrounds and his cultural nuance is different than maybe some Americans that they have been exposed to. So just to tell you a bit about what is important in that regards. Now, bowing etiquette and its significance. Bowing is a art form in itself in Japan. It really depends who you're bowing towards, be it your, if you can just nod, if you say good morning to someone, if you're not the friendliest person and you have somebody who's not superior to you, you don't even nod or anything. Somebody you don't really know, you will nod slightly. Depending on that, then your superior, you might bow a bit deeper. Then the vice president might receive a bigger bow. If it's somebody from another, from a business partner or from client, the bow might be even deeper. And then the deepest bows towards members of the royal family in Japan. So this is an art form in itself, and I encourage you to look into this, but don't stress it too much. As a foreigner, people will not expect it from it too much. Again, if you bow too deeply to somebody, it can be a bit awkward. So just try to get like 30 to maximum 45-degree bow when you bow to somebody. Now, there's also the nonverbal communication that I mentioned about. I mentioned in the very beginning in the high context communication style section. And reading body language and facial expression is really important, although sometimes facial expressions might be difficult to read. But don't get confused if you see a Japanese person falling asleep in a meeting. It constantly happens. They might not fall asleep, but they might be listening with their eyes closed. You never know. But it does happen, and this is nothing that is rude or anything. In Japan, it's especially the older participants of the meeting. It happens quite frequently. At my time at Komatsu, I saw that, and it's nothing that anybody feels offended about. So don't worry if that happens to you. They necessarily doesn't mean that they're not listening, but it could also mean that they are actually like super tired because of something or some drinking or whatever happened the night before. So if that happens, you can, in my case, I would try to sum up the meeting or speed up the meeting and get to the core of the meeting if you're already in that position, and to put your ask or your request on the table as soon as possible. But again, don't stress if that happens to you. Now, the importance of maintaining composure in business settings is something that I can't stress enough. If you're showing emotions like anger or especially impatience during a meeting, Japanese business partners will think that this is something that they have to count with once they do business with you on a frequent basis. So that's their due diligence. They want to see how you react on an emotional basis in stressful situations. If you can maintain your composure in stressful situations, in disappointing situations, you are one step closer to doing business with the Japanese. So don't lose your composure. Do everything possible to postpone your emotional expressions to afterwards, because this is not helpful at all with Japanese business partners or Japanese parties during a meeting or a negotiation. Now, what I would consider that you're doing in terms of, okay, what are the actionable steps that you can take? Do either a seminar on Japanese business culture, like a quick immersion with a role play, which is very useful. There are a couple of videos also on YouTube, obviously, on how to exchange business cards, how to sit down in meetings, which is the seating order in a meeting when you sit down, and what to do and not to do. So the do's and don'ts in Japanese business meetings. Make yourself acquainted with Japanese business culture and what to do and not to do in meetings. Because this can be the little, let's say, factor for a successful or not successful meeting if your business partner decides to work with you or will not decide to work with you. So I would try to be very observant, so adapting to business culture. You still be yourself. Don't try to change who you are, but be yourself and try to be observant of what your surroundings are doing. Try to be very conscious of your actions and try a bit to imitate to a certain extent what you see around you, and be mindful, and just don't think during the Japanese business meeting that you're not the most important person in the room, but try to just be humble. And if you can stay humble and observing what's happening around you, you're on the right path. If you also have some experiences in regards to Japanese business culture, or you have any questions, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. And I really look forward to your feedback, also in regards to other topics and subjects that you would like me to cover in the future. In the next episode, we're going to talk about market research and analysis, how to do market research and how to do analysis of Japanese market data, and how to work with that. And I thank you for listening today again. This is Eric signing out. Arigatou gozaimasu.